Hello, my name is Samir Tawasha. I'm a ninth grader from King's Academy. I'm joined by my co-host, Ms. Khaila, who has been working with the Round Square office since 2014.
Thank you, Samir. Welcome, Mr. William.
I'm also joined by Mr. William, who is the head of the History, Religion, and Society Department, and who has been here since 2017.
Hi, Samir and Khaila. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
1 year ago, we had a similar discussion about how different government systems handled the outbreak of COVID-19, and you, Mr. William, were on that panel. How would you say the situation has changed from 1 year ago?
Thank you, Samir. Yeah, it's certainly a good and fair question, right? A lot has happened in the last 365 days. I think the two main storylines that have developed since a year ago are first, we now have the vaccine. A year ago this time, not too many scientists believed that we would have a vaccine by November of 2020. Very few people believe that was actually scientifically possible. People were saying it might be a year from that time, which would be about right now. So that's the good news, is that we obviously, we kind of defied gravity on that. Some people have called it one of the great scientific achievements of the modern era, that we were able to get the vaccine so quickly. So that's been a game changer. But of course, on the bad side is that now we have a host of new viral strains that a year ago we didn't have. Last year, we just had the COVID-19, the standard strain. Now we, of course, have the British variant, the Indian variant, the Brazilian, all these new variants, which has really thrown a monkey wrench into the whole equation, hence raising new questions that we didn't have a year ago. As much as we've answered some old ones, now we have new ones.
So you touched upon how there's now different strains of the COVID-19 virus, and people are saying that the vaccines that we have now may require boosters in the future. How do you think that would affect the world?
Yeah, again, another great question. It seems like, unfortunately, we may be in a game of catch up here, right? So insofar as we get a vaccine and we're trying to get current, the virus is mutating and just staying a step ahead of us. Very frustrating, to say the least. So yeah, I think that's the $1 million question, right? I mean, is this going to end up being sort of like the seasonal flu shot? And please know, I'm not at all making the argument that the flu and COVID are the same. I'm not. But the flu shot is something that's done on an annual basis, typically as winter sets in and the weather starts to get colder. So will that sort of be the cycle of COVID, where we have annual or biannual shots? That's a good question. No one was necessarily saying that last November, but it seems like that might be a new concern. And I think, again, maybe that will hopefully be answered this next year.
If you want to stay on the topic of vaccines, in my previous interview with an expert from MedLabs, when we asked whether vaccines will be forced by governments, since they are that important to combat this disease, she mentioned that for human rights, to respect human rights, governments would not do that. Whereas at the beginning of this pandemic, countries forced lockdowns and curfews, and people were demonstrating because they felt that it violated human rights, but governments still went through the lockdowns and curfews. Why are they hesitant to do the same with the vaccines, do you think?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And let me be clear, I'm not a virologist, I'm not a scientist. Science was actually my worst subject, Samir, when I was your age. So I am not a scientist. I don't pretend to be. But I would say, as far as government and government policy is concerned, people often talk about this being a liberal left wing versus right wing, liberal versus conservative. It's really more of an authoritarian on the north axis, and then libertarian on the southern axis, more freedom. And that's exactly right, Khaila. The human rights issue is an important one, and there's some people who, whether you agree with them or not, they feel like, hey, this is my choice to get a vaccine because we don't know if there might be some side effects down the road, and the NRA, that's new, foreign, uncharted territory, and maybe some people are scared of the rollout on this. Jonas Salk. 1952, he didn't get the polio vaccine. It wasn't, perfect right out of the gate. So there's some people who might want to buy more time, and then there's other people who say, no, our government should, insist that people get these vaccinations. This should not be a personal choice, and impose there should be penalties, fines. I actually know people who think that if you can actually trace that someone got COVID from somebody else, whether it was intentional or not, there should be penalties. So, there's a broad spectrum of opinion on what kind of measure to take here between, authoritarianism on one end, and then libertarianism, my body, my choice. It's a really, really good question, but absolutely, human rights are going to be a big part of this.
You touched on autocracy versus democracy. How would these government systems handle like the actual administration of the COVID-19 vaccine?
Right. I can only. I mean, I'm from America, and I grew up in Michigan. So if I may, that's a state I'm a little bit more familiar with. In the state of Michigan, I can tell you we've actually been hit really, really hard with COVID cases. Michigan has had among the highest COVID cases in the country among the 50 states. Michigan's population is 10 million. It's the same as Jordan's 10 million, and the COVID cases are much higher, have been much higher in Michigan. So the governor of that state, who's a Democratic Party governor, Gretchen Whitmer, has imposed for the better part of a year very harsh lockdowns. Some businesses have been closed, been very controversial. Now, obviously, the economy has taken quite a brutal licking with this. I mean, a lot of small businesses went out, people have lost money, unemployment has gone up. And, there's been a lot of pushback, right? Open up the businesses, open it up. Well, now Michigan's up to 55% vaccination level. And if you've been vaccinated, now the people who've been vaccinated are allowed to take their masks off. So this kind of creates one of those situations. Okay, if you're walking around the streets, right, and this person is not, they're wearing a mask, does that mean that they have not had the vaccine? Does the person go up to them and say, shame on you, you should have had a vaccine? Maybe the person has been vaccinated. They just choose to have a mask on anyways, and so it's really hard. And then you have other states like Texas and Florida that have Republican governors. The Republican Party tends to be more for taking the masks off, looser protocols, resisting lockdowns. And they claim in their statistics that with having no lockdowns, no shutdowns, that the COVID cases per capita have actually been better than Michigan's. And so they're open, and their economies have not suffered the way Michigan has. So there's a lot of political infighting on this issue, to mask, to put lockdowns on, not to do it. It's really done at the state level in America.
So do you think the CDC was hasty to announce easing the regulations? Because even now, not all countries are jumping on this new regulation. They're still hesitant to announce masks off.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, obviously, most people around me have had their vaccine, and a lot of them are still keeping their mask on, and they're like, okay, I've got it, but I'd still rather have it on for that extra layer of protection. Again, a libertarian would say that's up to the individual, right? It's not up to the state. But what do you do now with, let's say, our neighbor to the west here, Israel, which has gone to this vaccine passport issue? So unless you show proof that you have been vaccinated, you're not allowed into restaurants or hotels or things like that. And my understanding here is in Jordan, those measures may be coming, or they're at least there's rumors of it, and it could happen, particularly in the tourist sector, right? Like the popular areas that tourists want to go to, like the Dead Sea and Wadi Rum and Petra, because let's not kid ourselves, the number one moneymaker for most countries is tourism. And they want the tourists to feel like they're safe, right? And so, okay, just so you know, when you go in these spots, everyone else that's around here, they've been vaccinated. So again, this is a big issue here. Is that a human rights violation that you can't go to those places if you've been vaccinated? When we have cases like the New York Yankees, where the whole team was vaccinated, all 24 players, and now all nine players have been tested positive for COVID. 9 players, a third of the team, even though they had the vaccine. They're called breakthrough cases. So they had Johnson & Johnson. What do we do now? Do we now say Johnson & Johnson isn't as good? We have to pull that. That doesn't count. Only Pfizer does. I mean, again, these are the new questions that we didn't have a year ago.
You touched on how people who have taken, such as the team you mentioned, who were vaccinated, yet they somehow managed to get the virus. With that new information, how do you think on a global level, certain countries get might change their policies or get affected?
I think that we really need more time, right? We need more time. We need more samples. Like we need more data. And to get that data, I would argue we just simply need more time. And I think part of the problem is we're so fatigued by this. We're so done, right? We want to move on. We want to get, and so every day seems like an arduous journey. Well, and the reality is, yes, it's been a long time, but 15 months roughly, or 18 months of this is really not in the grand scheme of thing. It's not that. Well, think about World War II, right? 6 years. So, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, but we just want to move on. I just think we're going to need more time and data. And it may come that ironically now you need to have a passport to get into places as proof, but maybe a year from now, we're going to say those vaccines aren't good enough. And here's the new ones that you need to get. That could be the new issue. We don't know. So yeah, it's like we have a lot of questions answered from a year ago, but now there's new ones that we could have never thought of at the time.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. William, and you too, Miss, for taking time and coming on and helping add on what we did in last symposium 1 year ago, and answer questions and even generate questions which people can keep in mind, think about, and use to reflect about their everyday process. So thank you both.
You're welcome, Samir. Thank you. Ms. Khaila, it was a pleasure. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. William. Thank you, Samir.